Do you remember Khalid Sheikh Mohammed? This is the handsome fellow when he was arrested in 2003 in Pakistan. They believe this guy was the operational mastermind behind the 9/11 attacks, that he planned it, that he was essentially the headquarters element, that he was the boss of the operation. Well, he's been in custody now for several years. He is awaiting some sort of trial. We heard yesterday from the Obama administration definitively that the trial against Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and other 9/11 co-defendants will not take place in Lower Manhattan. For a while, they wanted it to happen here in this city, but there was a lot of opposition. Joining us right now is the former federal prosecutor Anne-Marie McAvoy, also a law professor at Fordham University. Also, Julie Menin, president of Lower Manhattan's Community Board 1. She led the community's fight to get the trial moved elsewhere. It's been a long time coming, but they finally made the decision. How do you feel, Julie?
I'm thrilled about this. It shouldn't have taken a year and a half, though, Greg. I mean, it's ridiculous that it took Washington a year and a half to listen to our concerns. We raised concerns early on. It made no sense to spend $200 million of taxpayer money, and we were looking potentially at a multi-year trial. Should we spend $1 billion of taxpayer money and have 2,000 security checkpoints in a neighborhood? It was an ill-conceived plan from the start, and that's why we fought it.
I want to highlight something here, though, because I do think that Community Board 1 was instrumental in turning this back, or at least sparking the public debate about it. In the very early stages, some people forget this, but Mayor Bloomberg was actually on board with the idea of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed being tried in Lower Manhattan. You came out publicly, opposed it, you recommended other venues, and then the mayor started to fall in line. The Obama administration started to back off.
Well, that's exactly right. If we take back a year and a half ago, I put forward an op-ed in the New York Times suggesting, why don't we move this to Governor's Island? Why are we spending all this money and having 2,000 checkpoints in a neighborhood that's just starting to recover? The mayor was very supportive at the time of having the trial downtown. In fact, he called my idea the dumbest idea he had ever heard. And so I had a meeting with him at City Hall. He told me he was totally opposed to moving the trial. But eventually, I kept putting forward new ideas.
I think the eventually took about 72 hours when public opinion started to really come down on your side. Professor McAvoy, what is a military tribunal? He's not going to be tried in a traditional court. Give us the details, please.
Well, he'll be tried down in Guantanamo Bay. And the idea is that with a military commission, there are all kinds of rules that apply to it. But the rules of evidence and the way a court trial is handled is very different than in a federal court. So there are issues relating to national security concerns and so on, where information may come out, where they can control that much better in a military commission.
What about just moving the trial somewhere else? Why couldn't they have kept it in the federal court system? They've done that with other foreign nationals and people associated with 9/11, like Moussaoui, the alleged 20th hijacker. Why couldn't they have had this trial just somewhere else other than New York?
Well, besides the security issues, the other big concern was whether they could actually get convictions. You have Speedy Trial Act issues. We find out yesterday that he was actually indicted in December of 2009. You also have evidentiary issues. There's the understanding is that he was waterboarded potentially, and that means that any evidence that came out of those interviews is blocked from being used. And we had that issue with the Golani trial recently, where we had the who helped to blow up the embassies, and he was only convicted of 1 out of over 200 some odd counts.
As recently as last Friday, the Obama administration was still holding open the possibility that the trial could be held in New York. I'd like to hear now from the Attorney General, Eric Holder, during the news conference yesterday, where they abandoned the plans officially to come to New York. Let's listen.
I know this case in a way that members of Congress do not. I have looked at the files. I've spoken to the prosecutors. I know the tactical concerns that have to go into this decision. So do I know better than them? Yes. I respect their ability to disagree, but I think they should respect the fact that this is an executive branch function.
Well, this is kind of considered a loss for the Attorney General, Eric Holder. He wanted to have it in New York. It's not going to happen. I want to ask you, though, Julie Menin, you mentioned the New York Times. You wrote that op-ed. It kind of got the ball rolling on the debate. The editorial in today's Times accuses the Obama administration of cowardice. They're calling them cowards. The retreat was a victory for congressional pandering and an embarrassment for the Obama administration, which failed to stand up to it. Again, calling somebody a coward, I think, is those are pretty harsh words. What do you think of that editorial?
Well, I think what they're trying to say is that Congress was cowardly in intervening in what is essentially a legal matter. I mean, I'm a former regulatory attorney. I think that is a point that they're trying to get at there. But I will say that
calling anybody a coward here. I mean, we've had a healthy debate about this issue for a long time, and to say that everybody else is wrong on one side, look, I've been defending the New York Times for probably too much, but this just really crosses the line, don't you think?
Well, I think what's really important here is the fact that if they would have had the trial downtown, there would have been 2,000 checkpoints. The mistake that Holder made is not checking with the NYPD first. I mean, he basically made the decision, we're going to have this trial in New York, and never even looked at, what are the costs involved, what are the security measures involved. I will say, though, that the federal courts have a long history of having tougher sentences on terrorists. And so there are many of us who feel that with a military tribunal, there have been only 5 prosecutions in a military tribunal, and what will that mean? So there are some concerns.
Some concerns,
but we don't know what they
I'm sorry,
are
Julie.
yet.
No cowards in this debate. As the New York Times says, cowards. That's too much, Julie.
Cowards is obviously too strong a word to say. But I do think that with the federal courts,
I understand. Sometimes the sentences are extreme, and we haven't actually had have we had any convictions down at Guantanamo Bay yet?
We had a guilty plea recently, and we had actually one recently here in New York.
But it's been slow going. It's been very slow going.
Because we haven't been allowed to have any of the military tribunals go forward.
We're out of time.
That's been the problem.
Thanks so much. This got me fired up. Julie Menin and Marie McAvoy.